Well, good morning, everybody. This is becoming a regular habit, isn't it? Roughly 11 a.m. every day, Iain and I, or most days during the week, we are going live on socials, and we're also recording this as well. So if you're watching the recording, I hope that you enjoy the content. It's June the 4th, Thursday. We're going to be running a webinar this weekend as well. We'll talk about that during today's session. But really what I want to do, first of all, is introduce myself and introduce my good friend Iain. My name's Andy. I'm the head of the media platform here at the Republic of Old Souls. And Iain is our founder and president of the Republic of Old Souls and responsible for all the protocols that we have here, including our flagship, which, as many of you already know, is the Monopoly Game Changer. But what we're going to do today is we're going to dive into some of the historical record and some of the factual evidence surrounding these protocols. And the one in particular that we're going to do a deep dive on today is the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882. If you're not familiar with what that is, hopefully by the end of today's session you will be. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this from a layman perspective. Iain's documents, if you've read any of them, are very technical. Why? Because they need to be. But sometimes that makes it difficult for people to digest and to understand practically how can I apply that in my life and in my journey towards freedom. So what I thought we would do today is break the questions down as if you just read that document for the first time and you were asking what you felt were sensible questions surrounding the content. And I hope that that is helpful for you. So Iain, great to have you with us again. What I've done is I've broken this down into 4 sections. Sorry, not 4 sections. I think we've got 6 sections in total. So it's the Bills of Exchange Act, guys, that we're going to go through. And I think, as we often do, the first thing that we really need to do is look at the foundational information just to set the stage. So this illusion of debt and how money is actually made. So my first question to you, Iain, as a layman, having read that document for the very first time, is that in that paper, in that report, it states that back in 1933, a law called HJR 192 pretty much changed everything. And it claims that we don't actually pay our debts anymore. We just discharge them. So from a regular person who pays bills every month, what does that actually mean? And what, why does it mean that our debts aren't what we think they are?
Yeah, it's confusing because everything's inverted. The whole monopoly board, as I call it, is pretty much the opposite of what it appears. It appears to be a board of assets of players that are becoming affluent, earning money, exchanging money, paying bills, and operating in a system which logically, you would imagine that if you paid somebody, you're actually giving them some money. But that's not how it works at all. And it's the inverse. It's everything is a debt. And there is basically there's no assets on the monopoly board. Well, there are assets, but they've all been used in a permanent reorganization, which happened in 1933, where suddenly the world became a trust, a worldwide trust. And this trust has, if you like, it's like a big ledger. There's debtors on one side and creditors on the other side, and the two match, the two balance each other out. So the players or the player pieces on the monopoly board, the citizens, the birth certificate constructs, they don't own anything. They can't own anything. They get to use the things on the monopoly board. They get a quittable title. But at the same time as that, they are also regarded as bankers, as per the Bills of Exchange Act 1882. So what's going on here is that in 1933, the entire monopoly board, this worldwide trust, was made bankrupt. The creditors, which is the bloodline banking families, basically took the legal title over everything of any value. And that's land, property, infrastructure, buildings, anything of any value was used as collateral for the bailout, which they provided to the United States government. And because the United States dollar is the world reserve currency, that it over the next 15 or so years, it gradually spread to the rest of the world. And whilst they were withdrawing gold, that gold was withdrawn in 1933, in exchange for what they call Federal Reserve notes, which are basically promises to pay in the future. So I think that one way to look at this is that we used to have a system of substance where you could actually hand money from you to whoever it is that you owned, and that money was backed by gold, to a system of accounting ledgers, where all you can do now is issue a debt to discharge an existing debt. So we can't actually pay anything because there's no money to pay it with. All we can do is issue debt. And that is why the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882 was brought into being, because it enables the issuance of debt. And that's really what it's all about, bills of exchange, debt. And those bills are issued all the time, even though the issuer probably has no idea that they're issuing a bill of exchange, which effectively is a promise. So we've got no substance on this in this worldwide bankrupt trust. All we have is the ability to pay, to issue debts, to discharge existing debts, and all of the obligations, strangely enough, belong to the United States, because in the bankruptcy, the creditors made the United States bankrupt. They were able to issue Federal Reserve notes for commerce, backed by the collateral that the creditors, the bloodline banking families, took all the assets, including the birth certificates, which is when the birth certificate's registered, it's registered as a security, and all of the labor that the living man who's the agent for the birth certificate is going to put onto the monopoly board is also mortgaged in what's known as a usufruct system. So what you've got is a modern slavery system where it's all debt-based. You've got no ability to pay anything. The whole system is bankrupt permanently. It's called they call it a reorganization, but it's actually a bankruptcy, where the original bloodline banking family creditors bailed out the bankrupt United States. It spread to the rest of the world. Everything on the monopoly board is prepaid by the collateral that was handed over to the United States, who then in exchange put bills of exchange or Federal Reserve notes onto the monopoly board. All the obligations belong to the United States because they took the mortgage out. So they basically are the ultimate debtor, is the United States. They join all the other birth certificate constructs, that's the persons, the citizens, in on their bankruptcy in a prepaid system, because it was all of the assets were basically mortgaged to the original creditors. So all you can do now is discharge. You can't pay, you can only discharge, and you can't discharge unless you can issue bills of exchange, which is where the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882, which is interesting because it comes out in 1882, and yet the United States doesn't go into bankruptcy until 1933. So you've got 50 odd years that go by. So they're obviously planning it a long time before. All of these things are joined together so that nothing happens randomly. And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, we could do a whole hour on just the reorganization and how they got all the collateral, how they took a mortgage out over the whole monopoly board, and then how all the other countries joined together with it. The there's a lot of war going on. First World War at the scene, Second World War bankrupted the Western world, really, most of Asia as well. The Marshall Act that came out, the coming off the gold standard in 1973 completely. So there's a 1882 to 1973 series of events that basically shape the monetary system that we operate in today, which, in my opinion, isn't going away anytime soon. It works very, very well. So I don't see that it's going away. It's just being made more digital with stable coins and other sort of digitization of the money system, but it's pretty well digitized already, which perhaps we'll come back to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot for people to take in. I know it was when I first sort of started looking into this with the work that you've been doing. So, I mean, essentially what you're saying here then is if I go into my wallet, and I know we're on British pounds, but if I take out, there's a £20 note. I'm feeling a bit flush today. So there's a 20. And if I look at the top of that £20 note, it says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of £20. So this is a promise to pay. It's like an IOU. If I gave that to you right now, Iain, I'm not giving you anything of value, am I? I'm just saying at some point in time, I promise to pay you the equivalent of, whatever £20 is worth these days. So if I hand that to you, I've just created a debt. That's essentially what you're saying. So I'm assuming that this would be considered a bill of exchange, yes? Oh, you're muted, Iain.
Sorry, yes, it's a bill of exchange. It's basically ring-fenced by the paper, because you can hand it to me and I can hand it to someone else and they can hand it on and on and on and on and on it goes. So that's the paper version of what's really going on in the digital version. When you make a proper bank payment, it's just like making a promise to pay, but digitally doing it, and it operates in a very similar way. The paper, is more inconvenient for those that control the system, because they don't know who's giving that bit of paper to the next party, to the next party, to the next party. But with digital transactions, they know everything that's going on. They can track everything.
So every time I tap my phone, every time I make a payment online, whatever it may be, that's all tracked and traced. So I get that. Okay. So your report mentions a banking expert as well, Professor Richard Werner. And in his work, he proved that commercial banks don't actually slide any money over the table when they give us a loan, do they? That they create it out of nothing. So if they create money out of nothing when we sign the paperwork, for a loan or a mortgage or whatever it is, that to me, that's basically saying that it's my handwritten signature that's creating the money. How is that even possible? That my signature is the real source of the funds?
Well, Professor Richard Werner, I think it took him 10 years to study this. He wrote The Princes of the Yen in the early 2000s, because he was working in the Japanese central bank at the time, and he wrote all about how the Japanese economy had gone from being completely obliterated after the Second World War to rising up into the 1980s, being one of the powerhouse economies of the world. And it was all done through ex nihilo credit creation, which is the same as has happened with the Chinese economy. It's the same model. They've become arguably the second largest economy in the world through ex nihilo credit creation. So Professor Richard Werner actually studied how was this money system really working, and he spoke to a lot of people, asked a lot of people their opinions on how they thought it worked. That's in his paper called The Three Theories of Money. where people think that the central bank is the creator of the money, or some other people think that the government creates the money, and other people think that it's fractional reserve, and the banks can, hold a pound or a dollar and then multiply it up by 10 other ones. They take a pound in of deposits of money, and then they can lend out 10 times that, fractional reserve. So those three theories are all wrong. Professor Richard Werner discusses them all, dispels them all in his three theories of money paper. And then what he did was he went into a bank and he actually applied for a loan, and he tracked through their internal process of how the loan was created from his signature, and it's all documented in one of his other research reports, which I think is called "Can Banks Really Create Money Out of Nothing?" And he tracks through exactly how that works. So the banker, as I mentioned earlier on, is the birth certificate construct, which is known in the law dictionaries as a person. And if you look at the Bills of Exchange Act, it says that a body of persons will be regarded as a banker. Well, so therefore, the birth certificate construct is a banker that can issue negotiable instruments. So what Richard Werner had proven in his research was that he, the living Richard Werner, the living soul, transferred energy to the birth certificate construct. He's the agent. Richard Werner, the living man, is the agent for Richard Werner, the birth certificate construct. When Richard Werner signed for the loan, a bill of exchange was created, a promise to pay in the future. It's negotiable. It's a negotiable instrument, meaning that it can be negotiated by, there's two parties. There's the sender and the receiver. Richard Werner is the maker of the instrument because he's made it through his signature. He's then deposited it with the bank. The bank has taken it in as a asset deposit. They then match it instantaneously with a liability on the other side of their balance sheet, which is where the debt comes from. So now Richard Werner's loan has now been created as a debt. It's a negotiable instrument. It's a bill of exchange, which is now being created into a security. And because the bank pretends that it's lending its own money, they can add to the contract with Richard Werner that he has to pay them interest for the privilege of borrowing his own energy, effectively. And that interest makes the debt security quite valuable because there's a lot of interest to pay on this loan. It may go on 30 years. And if you add all the interest up on this loan that Richard actually created through his signature, the bank is going to do very well from the collection of interest. Richard's going to have to work or produce something, some kind of cash flow to finance the interest. The bank is going to collect it. But of course, what the banks want to do is they want to maximize their earnings capability. So they sell Richard's promise to pay in the future, his negotiable instrument, this bill of exchange. They sell it because it's got an interest rate connected to it, an interest a receivable of interest that they can sell to the investment bank community, and the investment banks are going to use it themselves. And I think we're going to do another deep dive into hypothecation at some point, what the investment banks are doing with that note. So if you multiply that out across the whole world, and include loans, credit cards, and also interestingly bank payments, or what we call bank payments, they're just new negotiable instruments actually, but we call them bank payments because it looks like we're paying, where we're sending a payment, but we're not actually doing that. We're issuing a new bit of exchange and a new negotiable instrument, and so that the whole system is based on negotiable instruments. Even when the governments claim that they're raising money through what they call quantitative easing, is one way they describe it. They get the Treasury and the central bank together, and the Treasury says, look, we need to raise $100 billion. And the central bank will say, okay, fine, issue a promise to pay to us for 100 billion, and we'll give you back 100 billion. And that's exactly what the governments do, the treasuries. That's how they raise, it's how they increase their ability to spend and bail things out, like bail out banks and bail out all sorts of players in the market, and finance pandemics and all kinds of stuff like this.
Wow.
Build armies and navies and air forces, and go into space exploration and put satellites up, and all of these things is all done through the same mechanism that Richard Werner proved in his study, which is he signed for a promise. He created a promise to pay in the future by his signature, and a bank took it and said, well, thanks for that, we will now give you back the loan. And that's what the governments do with the treasuries and the central banks. It's what we all do. We don't realize we're doing it. We're doing it as the maker of the negotiable instruments. And then on the other side, you've got a payer, and a payor, and you put those two together, and they exchange a negotiable instrument, which is based upon a bill of exchange. And that's where all your world debt comes from as well. It's all of these promises to pay in the future, add them all up. They're all debt based. Everything on that monopoly board is debt based, and add them all together, and that's your world debt right there.
So you're basically saying that world debt, that figure, is what's owed back to us as living people.
Yeah, I mean, the entirety of the world debt really is all underpinned by the energy of the people. Even the debt the governments create through their ex-nihilo credit creation, their quantitative easing, because the birth certificates have all been taken as collateral for the debt. So they are securitizing the human energy of the people, which is why they use a birth certificate registration system. It's the predominant reason why, because they can use it's like a security on the future energy of the living soul. They can securitize that. They can use that as collateral. So if you think of it like, in this modern slavery system, how much is a slave worth? Well, at the age of 18, the slave might have another arguably 50, 60 years of labor. How much is that going to generate? Well, that slave at 18 is probably worth quite a bit if you take all of the future labor that slave could earn, and all the taxes they could pay, and anything else that they might have to pay, debt, interest, and things like that. So at the age of 18, the birth certificate is worth, the future value of it is pretty high. It doesn't belong to the living soul. It belongs to the state, because it's being registered to them as an asset to underwrite the bankruptcy, as collateral for the bankruptcy. So all these people running around thinking, if I can monetize my birth certificate, send it to the United States Treasury, with some other bits of paper, and telling them that it's worth $100 million, send me my 100 million. It's never going to work, because the security that is created from the birth certificate registration is already registered to the state as collateral for the bankruptcy, and it's part of the usufruct system. They take all the assets and they give back things that we can all use, and then we pay rent on them, which is taxes. So that's all. It's all called. It's a usufruct system where the assets are lent back for the use. The people get to use the assets, the cars, the houses, the buildings, the roads, the everything, in a system where all of those things are owned by the original creditors, which is the legal title is already registered, then including the birth certificates, which are effectively securities.
Wow. If you're watching on socials right now, this might be a lot to wrap your head around. I get that, but let me know if you're picking up what Iain's putting down here. You know, this is important information for you to understand. So if you want to comment, please comment. Let me know. Iain, if my signature that's creating the value for a loan, or creating the value, or the the credit for the loan, why does the bank get to keep it? And what does in your report you talk about the banking system treats our money as abandoned property?
Well, they presume that these negotiable instruments that we've all created, they presume that they are able to use them and take the legal title to them. And they give the equitable title. They leave the equitable title to the birth certificate constructs. So they are supposed to. They're supposed to register the negotiable instruments as collateral of the maker, but they never do, because the maker, that's the birth certificate construct, never turns up and lays a claim on their own property. So the negotiable instrument is issued into the system, and it really is abandoned as soon as it's issued. And the banks, because they know that the overwhelming majority of the world population don't know how the system works, they use the negotiable instruments as if they belong to the banks, but they're just nominees. The banks are nominees for the original makers, which is the birth certificate construct, and ultimately the energy is created from the living soul, the living man or woman, which is the ultimate creditor of the entire system. But they know, the banks know, that the true creditor is highly unlikely to turn up and lay a claim on the negotiable instruments, and the energy that belongs to them. So they presume, the banks just presume, that they can use the energy, the securities, as if it were their own. And they do some clever stuff, really, because they register these securities and disguise them. They change the name. They register them at Seed and Company, part of the Depository Trust Company.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
They centrally register them all, and then they change the name so that you don't actually know which bank owns what. And they basically leave the door open for the true creditor to turn up, but invariably the true creditor never does turn up and lay a claim on the original instruments themselves. So the banks just keep on using them because they get away with it. And that's a large part of what they're doing, is using our energy. But the giveaway, and we've sort of touched on this before, the giveaway is that the banks pay tax for the use of the human energy on their 945 tax modules. So if they actually owned the negotiable instruments, these bills of exchange, they wouldn't be paying tax for the use of them, but they are. And that is the smoking gun of the entire banking industry, which they won't thank me for revealing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I want to go into where you talk about this Wall Street game as well. The DTCC, I want to talk about that. But before we kind of get into that, let's look at this shift then, because there needs to be a shift from being a debtor to being a creditor. And you talk about something called holder in due course. And the reason that I want to cover this, not just because it's in your report, but for example, we've just had a comment on social media where somebody who's watching has said, "Can we get them back?" So can we get these negotiable instruments, or can we get these taxes back that the banks are paying for the use of your credit energy? The simple answer to that, to whoever it was that commented, is yes. And we're going to go into that in a bit more detail. We've had some other great comments as well. We've had a comment that says, every time Iain talks about this, another piece of the jigsaw falls into place in my mind. Beliefs are very hard to dislodge once they're implanted, and they absolutely are. I can speak to that. It took me quite a while to shift my sort of thought process in, because like you said, Iain, everything's inverted, isn't it? So let's talk about this shift then from debtor to creditor. There's a lot of talk in your document about getting something called holder in due course status. So again, thinking about this in a layman's perspective, in plain English, what does that mean? And how does it change somebody's role from just a regular borrower who owes money to a creditor who actually has a legal right to enforce the return of those taxes?
Well, the holder of an instrument can use it on behalf of the creditor. So what the banks do is they presume that they are the holder in due course of all of these securities. They get to use them, and they presume that they're using them for the benefit of the creditors. Of course, the creditors are never going to come up. They're never going to turn up and make a claim on them. So it's a bit disingenuous what they do, but they get away with it because of the ignorance of the people that are playing this game of Monopoly without realizing what it is they're actually doing. So the holder is holding the instrument as a nominee. They're like a trustee, and the banks are operating as nominees, and they get to use the negotiable instruments for their own purposes, because they're able to, as I mentioned just now, hypothecate the value of these securities, multiply them up effectively. But they can't do that if a actual true holder in due course lays a claim to the negotiable instruments, which the banks presume that they hold. They presume that they are the holder in due course of these instruments. But when the true holder in due course turns up and lays a claim to them, which is done via a foreign grant or trust, filing 1099 OID, that shifts the holder in due course, presumption of holder in due course from the bank that's holding the securities to the 98 series international grantor trust that is now the holder in due course, the holder of the securities, for the benefit of the true creditor, which is the beneficiary as a living soul of the international grantor trust. So you've got, like, the fake nominee is replaced by the real nominee, and that completely changes the game. And that then means that the taxes that the banks are paying and have already paid belong now to the true holder in due course, which is the foreign grantor trust. And that's pretty much what I call it tax redirection, because at the moment the taxes are going to the United States Treasury for the benefit of the original creditors, but the taxes don't really belong to the original creditors. They belong, original creditors being the bloodline banking families, the taxes actually belong to the current creditors, which are those that transferred their energy onto the board. They are, like Return to Sender, that Elvis Presley track,
Yeah.
It really is like that. It's like he who creates owns. Yeah. So the energy belonged to the living soul. It was transferred onto the monopoly board through the birth certificate construct, the banker, as confirmed in the Bills of Exchange Act. And now what's happening is the living soul is making a claim, but through a nominee. And the nominee is the Foreign Grantors Trust, that is separate from the birth certificate construct, very important, separate, not contaminated by the birth certificate contract because it's a debtor, whereas the 98 series grantor trust is a creditor entity, holder in due course, with the actual energy provider, if you like, the living soul as the beneficiary of the grantor trust. So as I said, the fake nominee is replaced by the real nominee in the game.
Okay, so this holder in due course is quite quite instrumental in what we're talking about here, and I want to get into the trust side of things as well. We've had a comment on socials from David, who's just said the banks just ignore any attempt to claim the negotiable instrument, and we have no recourse that I have found. Hold tight, David. We're not talking about recouping the negotiable instruments themselves. We're talking about taxes that are paid for the use of your credit energy, a very, very different matter. And you absolutely have the right to recourse there and to have those back. So let's maybe dig into this a little bit more then, Iain, because I understand now that shifting from this debtor to creditor status is important, and that holder in due course is everything when it comes to that. But you have to have the right mechanics in place to be able to do it. So maybe we could look now at this Wall Street game that I spoke about earlier. I always thought that when I bought a house, my bank kept my mortgage paperwork safe and sound. Your deeds will be there ready for you when you've paid your mortgage off. But your report talks about massive organizations who are called the DTCC, and then you mentioned earlier about Seed and Co. that actually split up the ownership. So who are these guys, and what are they actually doing with our loans and our mortgages?
Well, they work with all the investment banks. So the depository trust company is where the securities are registered, but they are actually transferred into Seed and Company, where Seed and Company holds them and creates a name for them. So if you think of them as tranches or bundles of securities that are sort of all linked together in a portfolio, in lots of different portfolios, Seed and Company will give them a name on behalf of the investment banks that are using them to hypothecate, to expand, and to profit from the use of them. And the investment banks have to pay tax for the use of the human energy. So they are paying taxes using the bank's EIN number, that's their employee identification number. They reference what's called a CUSIP number, which is the number of the tranche. It's the reference number of the securities tranche, which Seed and Company has changed the name on it. It's changed the name from, say, JP Morgan, and they'll call it some other name so that it's difficult to see what's going on. But the giveaway is that when the bank pays the taxes, the tax module is visible. It's a public, you can audit it in the public domain, and you can see which bank is paying what tax, because you can see the bank's EIN numbers, or the EIN number of the bank, and you can see what taxes they're paying on their 945 module. So you know that they are using these securities, and they vastly underfund the taxes on the 945 module, because the 945 module is purely there for the creditors. So the living soul that could turn up, if they knew how to do it, and make a claim on that tax. The banks know that doesn't happen very often. So they vastly underfund their 945 tax modules. But they also, even if the creditors did turn up, I don't want to make it very easy for the creditors to get hold of the taxes, which is what they're entitled to. So they basically overpay on their other tax modules and vastly underpay on the 945 tax module, because they don't really want to admit that they're using the human energy and paying tax on it. They don't really want to admit that. So they underfund the 945 tax module. They get the Seed and Company to change the name of the tranches, which is a disguise. But the giveaway is the fact that even if they paid $1 on the 945 tax module, it proves that they're paying taxes for the use of human energy. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, that's their smoking gun. That they, it's like it's the inconvenient truth that they don't want you to know is the taxes they're paying for the use of your energy, whilst they pretend to be the holder in due course, but actually all they really are is a nominee for you. They don't want you to know that either.
Wow. I mean, we've had some more comments coming in. This is such amazing research. They must have thought no one would discover this. Well, when they wrote this all out, Lee, they said maybe 1 in a million would discover this. Iain has, and we're very, very, privileged to be able to deliver this information to you guys as well. So we've had another question that's come through, Iain. QSIP number ? Could you just elaborate on what a QSIP is?
Yeah, I mean, everything's digital, and every tranche of securities has got a reference number. So when banks put, if you watch the movie The Big Short, it's a very good movie to let you get an insight into what the investment banks are doing. They put all these securities, these promises to pay, in bundles. Like they wrap them all in and give them a name, and they create like a trust structure. And they put 100 or 1,000 of these mortgages. Most of them are mortgages, because there's a lot of mortgages in the world. They put a lot of these mortgage, they call them CDOs, credit default obligations, or all sorts of fancy names they give these things. Collateralized debt obligations was what they were calling them in the alleged financial crisis of 2008. CDOs, the investment banks would trade them. And what they're doing is trading the current value of these debt obligations that they're holding as with seeding company, but through this street name environment. And they're just buying and selling them to each other, but they're buying and selling them in tranches, not one by one. There could be, it could be 10,000 mortgages in a tranche. And that would have a reference number for the tranche. I used to create bonds, which are like securities, with a reference number and trade them years ago when I was doing, well, I won't go into it, but I was basically putting assets into bonds, and they each one, you have a reference number to identify it, so that when you trade it on the investment markets, people can identify what it is, and you can buy and sell it. You can buy and sell parts of it. You can buy and sell bits of it, but everybody knows what it is. It's like a consignment. It's like a warehouse receipt for a load of goods, all wrapped up in a box. The box has got a reference number. Everything in the box belongs to the box. It's like that, basically.
Okay, perfect. David, you're absolutely right. The recourse has to be through a third party, because we can't be on the monopoly board. That you've got it. You've got it. So let's move on then, Iain. In terms of you've spoken about the fact that they hide the true ownership, because people are never going to presume that they do have ownership. The banks presume they have ownership, but like you said, the smoking gun by the looks of things here is that they're paying taxes. So if we're paying taxes, we've already established that we pay taxes because we don't own anything. We don't have rights. We don't have ownership. We just have privileges, and privileges are taxable. So if the banks are paying taxes, what does that tell you? It tells you that they don't own those securities. They don't own them. They're just using them, and they're being very presumptuous in the fact that, well, finders keepers kind of thing, really. No one's going to turn up for these, so we'll just claim that they're ours. We'll pay the taxes because we know they're due. But that, as Iain said, is the smoking gun. You have the opportunity to be able to recoup those taxes paid. Why do you feel the banks are working so hard to hide our names behind these massive corporate accounts, Iain? What are they doing behind the scenes with our signatures to back their own kind of corporate debts and make massive profits that we never see?
Well, they're there to they're there to continue this illusion and deception. The banks, the original bloodline family banks that bailed out the United States government, they don't want people to know how this system works. The investment banks, many of the investment banks that are operating today are part of that bloodline. If you look at the owners of the Federal Reserve, you'll see all the original bloodline banking families that own the Federal Reserve, and they don't want the public to know that the Federal Reserve isn't federal. They don't want the public to know that the securities are basically debts that belong back to the people. I think somebody on the stream now is, saying, well, you can't get the securities back. You don't actually want them back. You just want the taxes. You want the taxes that the banks are paying for using them. That's where the liquidity is. That's where the game changer is. You don't want the actual note back. What are you going to do with it? It's going to give you a bit of paper with, the original note that was created right at the outset of a mortgage, for example. What can you do with it? You can't do much with it, but you can do something with tax redirection, which is what we specialize in. I mean, that's something that you can practically use. You can spend it, because it is Federal Reserve notes that you get back. The taxes are Federal Reserve notes, so that's how you play the game as a creditor, because you see that the taxes are meant to go to the creditors. The taxes that the investment banks pay are not going to you at the moment. If you've created signature credit, which you probably have, they are going to the original creditors. But those taxes belong to the real creditors. And that's what our system does, is it redirects the taxes to the rightful owners, but not back through to the birth certificate construct, because that would be a disaster. Back through to a foreign grantors trust that can operate just like the banks do, but actually do it genuinely as the holder in due course, as it says in the IRS publication 1212. It's all in that publication, actually. It doesn't go on. It doesn't talk about Bills of Exchange Act. It doesn't talk about the 945 tax ledgers, but it does give you a massive clue about holder in due course.
Oh, I'm enjoying this one today, Ian, and I hope you guys are enjoying it as well. We're getting comments coming through, which is great. So let's talk about what the IRS do. I want to talk about the IRS trap here as well, because there definitely is one. There's a right way and there's a very, very wrong way to do this. And I want to talk about these tax buckets. You speak again, in your report, the banks are required by the IRS to report the interest on these signature loans and pay this tax withholding, but they systematically fail to give the proper paperwork. So this form 1099 OID that you talk about, in reality, the banks are supposed to file that, aren't they? But they don't. So why are they keeping us in the dark and hiding these tax credits on their own ledgers when they should, in reality, be required to file a 1099 OID? And then I want to get into kind of the trust side of things and how your trust can file 1099 OID to change the game there.
Well, they don't file 1099 OID because if they did, then they couldn't use the credit. They couldn't use the securities, because as soon as the 1099 OID is filed, the true owner of the security, the true holder in due course, I should say, has to be revealed. So they don't. They just don't file it. They get to use the securities, the credit energy. As soon as they file 1099 OID, they're going to have to put themselves down as the debtor entity on the securities, and they're not going to do that. So they're going to presume that they're creditors. They're going to use the the credit energy to hypothecate, knowing that the true creditor is unlikely to turn up. Mostly that's the case. So they can carry on using it, the energy. And they don't mind paying taxes on it, because the value of using the securities is worth way more than the taxes they pay. So for them, it's a good game. They can basically use all this energy, make a bundle by using it. Taxes are minimal that they're paying compared to what they're making. So the last thing they're going to do is say, hey, we're not the holder in due course of these securities, and file 1099 OID. But inconveniently for them, if a grantor's trust files 1099 OID and identifies them as the payer, which is the payer on the 945 tax ledger, and the trust itself as the recipient of the taxes, then the game's up for them on that particular 1099 OID.
Okay. So there is a method, there is a way to do this. We'll dig into that in a second. Part of your research got very technical. It says that the banks intentionally shift their tax money around as well. So we've got this 945 ledger that you speak of, which is where the taxes are paid against the credit energy that we have all created. So if there's a 945 ledger specifically for that, then clearly credit energy is real. Everything that comes before that clearly is real. Otherwise, the 945 ledger would not even exist. But you speak about another one, Form 1120, another tax ledger, where they seem to put an awful lot of money on that one, and not much on the 945. Why do they do that?
Well, they again, they're trying to disguise the fact that they're actually using the credit energy. So they lowball the 945 tax payments, and they load up the 1120, which is, taxes on wages and all sorts of other they call it non-farm payroll and all this, or non-payroll taxes, all sorts of other things that they pay taxes for. Which is the dominant number, but the dominant tax module is the 945 module. The IRS should really be saying, hey, you need to be paying the correct amount on the 945 tax module, but they don't, because they enable the taxpayer to nominate, because it is a discretionary system where they can nominate where they pay their taxes. Okay. And of course, banks discretionary decide to pay the majority of their taxes on other tax modules, not on the 945 tax module. Of course, they should be, but they don't. They get away with it. The IRS doesn't force them to pay the correct amount on the 945 tax module. And the true holders in due course of true creditors invariably don't turn up and correct the record. So they get away with it year in, year out. Every year they kind of get away with the same deception, really. But it's not really a deception. It's just that they're not forced to do it, so they don't. And that's the reality of it. Okay.
Now you mentioned as well a moment ago that the 945, you said that it was the dominant tax module. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I would see that is that it's the dominant tax module, because these other modules, like the 1120 that you've spoken about, there is the ability to move taxes from, let's say, the 1120, where there's a ton of tax paid, over to the 945. But you can't do it the other way around. You can't move from 945 to one of these others, but you can move from the others to the 945 because of this underfunding. So that, to me, that would say this is why it's the dominant one, because you have the ability to do that. So I want to just touch on that, Iain, this cross-modular transfer that is available, because one thing that I could see here is that, well, if they're underfunding, this 945 module, and all these people read your reports, and they want to move forwards, and they say, hey, yeah, I want my taxes back. Who wouldn't want the taxes back? But the 945 is underfunded and grossly underfunded, then there's not enough on there to be able to pay these people back, for them to recoup those taxes back. But what you're saying is that you can actually move from one of the bigger modules, or one of the modules that has more on it, to the 945 to make up the shortfall of the underfunding. How does that work?
Well, the holder in due course has rights to receive the taxes due to them. So if you have a portfolio of grantor trusts that is operating, and all of them are the rightful holders in due course of the taxes, and there's not enough tax paid on the 945 module, the grantor trust, the officer of the grantor trust, can force or command the IRS to make an adjustment to move the taxes onto the 945 ledgers, because they have a claim over it, and they are the dominant, they are the holder in due course. They're the creditor. So the creditor says to the bankruptcy trustee, creditor being the grantor trust, the bankruptcy trustee being the United States Treasury, you're holding taxes that belong to us, and they're on this other module. Move it to the 945 module, and then release it to the grantor trust as it's right to receive it, because it is the true creditor, and the IRS is there as the trustee of the bankruptcy. They have to do what is required by the creditors, and that's basically what's going on. It's the game that the banks are playing is unmasked by the fact that the grantor trust turns up as the holder in due course with more rights than the banks have got. You're not calling the bank up saying, hey, move taxes onto this 945 tax module. The grantor trust is saying that to the IRS to internally move taxes that they've already received, not new taxes. They've already received them, and put them onto the right module, and then release them to the true creditors, which is the right of the holder in due course.
Okay, so this holder in due course, like I thought, is pivotal, but also a very powerful position to hold as well. So I want to talk a little bit about this 98 series grantor trust that you've been speaking about, because I want people to understand what that is, why it's necessary, why this is the doorway. Because David, you commented on socials about, and you got that, that the recourse has to be done through a third party. That is the 98 series grantor trust. It has to be done through that structure, because we can't be on the monopoly board as living people. You're absolutely right. But another question that David has raised is, and this is a great one, and I want to cover this before we kind of dive into the mechanics of how the recourse can take place. He said, if they have this huge deception going on, can you explain why they leave recourse available to us? Why do they leave this little door open to us? If it's such a grand plan and a great deception, why not just leave the door locked so we can't do anything?
Well, because the original creditors had to have the doorway open for them. The permanent reorganization of the United States meant that the original creditors could collect taxes for their own purposes. So they've left the door open for the original creditors. They're not going to close that door. Why would they? The only way that they can get taxes to finance the original bailout is through the 945 tax module. And I'm sure that they are moving. They probably don't need to do it so much now, but in the early days of the reorganization, I'm sure that the 945 tax modules were being financed at the right level, and the original creditors were getting what was due to them from that module. So they've left the module there because it's the only module that it enables the creditors to receive the taxes that belong to them. that tax redirection. It can't come from any other tax module. It has to come from the 945 tax module.
I hope that answers your question, David. If you think the elites aren't doing this and haven't been doing this for a mighty long time, then think again. That is why that doorway is open. They just don't think that any of us are going to figure it out, and we have. So, or rather, Iain has. So just a couple more questions here that we've got, Iain. Does this system of paperwork apply to all countries? Pretty much it does. I know there's a few that it doesn't. There's the odd one or two, but as long as they are all linked to the banking systems, if you want to just elaborate on that.
Yeah, the trust is worldwide. The United States dollar is the dominant currency. It's the world reserve currency. The IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, they have this huge network of banks that all belong to the same system worldwide. And even if you're in a country that doesn't appear to have a bank that has anything to do with the United States, behind the scenes, there probably will be a correspondent bank. The clearing banks, they want to sell securities to the investment banks because that's what they make a lot of. They make a lot of upfront profit that way. Yeah. So they're very likely to have a relationship, even if they don't publish it easily. You can find it, and our system finds the linkages. They generally have a link to a US bank somewhere in the background that you're not going to know about, which will qualify the the signature credit tax redirection. Probably applies in your country, depending on, unless you're in North Korea or North Cyprus, you're probably going to find it works.
Okay. So let's dig into this 98 series trust then. This is the recovery tool. To David's point about there being a sort of a third party to actually recover these taxes. So, but what I want to do here is I want to also play devil's advocate. If I just try and fix this myself, let's say using my national insurance number here in the UK, or my my SSN number if I'm in the States, or my ITIN number or whatever, and I go and I file, because you can get a 1099 OID, you can get the form, you fill it in yourself if you wanted to, and say, hey, I want these taxes back. If I do that, what you're talking about in this document is that the IRS computer system has something called an algorithm 810, or this 810 algorithm, and that will instantly freeze and flag that as an unallowable refund. Why can't I just use my regular personal identity to sort that out?
Well, it comes back to holder in due course again. You see, the birth certificate construct can never be a holder in due course because it is already registered to the state as a debtor entity. It's a banking debtor entity. It can never operate as a holder in due course because it can only be representing the state. It can't be representing the true creditor in this tax system. So you have to create a nominee that hasn't already been registered to the state, which is why a foreign grantor's trust works, because it's not registered in a country. It's got its own country. It's effectively its own nation. So you're creating a holder in due course entity that isn't already registered to a country where they can basically treat it as a debtor entity. It's treated as a creditor entity. It's treated as soon as it files the 1099 OID, it's then treated as the holder in due course, in line with the IRS publication 1212.
Okay. So to bypass that freeze that you've spoken about, the protocol that we have, the Clifford protocol, sets up a 98 series international grantor trust that intentionally fails a couple of government tests as well, called the court and control tests. I want to just go into that because that might seem a little bit counterintuitive intuitive to, you would think that if you're going to set up this trust that it needs to be bulletproof and it passes all the tests before you actually set it off. So why on earth do we want a trust to fail government tests, and how does that protect us?
Well, the trust can't be seen to be a domestic United States trust, and the court test and the control test are the tests that they put to it to make sure that it is independent of the United States. It's not controlled by a citizen of the United States, and it stands on its own effectively as its own entity without control from the United States. Because if it's controlled from the United States, then it's going to be a debtor entity. It is separate from the United States, making it viable to actually genuinely be the holder in due course. It's not part of a debtor system. It stands on its own 2 feet as a creditor entity. But if it were controlled by a citizen of the United States or a trust company of the United States, then it would be a debtor entity, and it couldn't qualify as holder in due course.
Okay, so holder in due course needs to have creditor status. Has to be an international trust so that it's not tied to the US, because the minute it's tied to US jurisdiction, it becomes a debtor entity, not a creditor entity. We've had another question come through from David, and I love your comments, David. You're clearly very engaged with this, which is great. David's put, by doing this through you, is there any risk we take? Is this lawful to go through this? It's the USA, and yet we are outside the USA. What law applies? So I think maybe we need to just go back to that one world system again, Iain, to just explain that this is a one world commercial system. And then just to make sure that David understands that you can do this with no risk.
Yeah, the bits of the process that are absolutely required to make it work is the formation of the trust. That is done with the IRS. So the actual grantor trust itself, the EIN number, comes from the IRS. They know it's a grantor's trust, a foreign grantor's trust. The appointment of a tax filing, a tax professional to file the 1099 OID, that is a US registered tax preparer, or ERO, electronic reporting officer. That has to be, again, registered with the IRS and approved and holding the right license. You've then got the forensic research of tracking the original signature credit. That doesn't have to be in the US, but we run a AI system that tracks the original linkages to the original signatures, to the credit, which CUSIP numbers does the credit belong to, which banks are paying taxes on it, how much tax are they paying on it. That is all done by our system. That doesn't have to be in the United States. It can be done anywhere. But then the way that the trust is represented is through an attorney-in-fact mandate, and that the attorney-in-fact mandate is in Wyoming. So it's a specialist structure that is operating for the grantor. So the grantor stays outside the United States as a foreign alien to the United States, but uses an attorney-in-fact mandate, so a power of attorney mandate in the United States, because it's all very well the trust being the holder in due course, but it has to receive the tax redirection in a bank account that can only operate in the United States system. So you need the holder in due course to have a bank account. The foreign grantor's trust has to have a United States bank account to receive the redirected taxes. Well, it can only receive those redirected taxes if it has a trustee that qualifies to open a bank account in the United States. So when we're out. The trust is out of the United States from its standing point of view, so that it qualifies as the holder in due course. But it's in the United States from a banking point of view, so that it can actually receive the redirection of the taxes, and it can't file 1099 OID unless it's being done by a tax professional that's got a license with the US. With the IRS. So it's fairly complex, and if you're thinking of trying to do it yourself, there's a lot of barriers to overcome. One of the biggest barriers is getting a trust genuinely outside the United States and receiving the funds in the United States with a bank account in the United States. That's one of the most difficult parts of this financial engineering that I've put together, is how do you qualify outside the US and then inside the US at the same time?
At the same time, yeah. So I hope that answers your question, David. I'm going to be going through, we're just going to cover section 6 here, because Iain's, I swear to God, you read my notes before I before I even bring the questions to you, Iain, but I know you don't. So let's just go into the private vault side of things as well, because it's all very well recouping these taxes, but if you can't realize them as, quote unquote spendable money, there's not much point, is there? Like you said, you don't want the original negotiable instruments back. What are you going to do with those? You can't do anything with those, but you can spend and recoup taxes. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then what I'll do at the end for you guys who are with us on socials is I'm going to drop you some links as well. So they'll appear here on the screen under the banner section. There's a couple of links there that I think you'll find very, very useful. Certainly one of our resource links, which is Ecclesia Law, where all of Iain's reports are listed there. So we'll talk about that as well. So now that we've kind of gone through all these phases, we've gone through, why the Bills of Exchange Act is what it is, and now everything we're doing is all interlinked with that. This is all historical fact. And the structure that you've put together is incredibly complex, but it's very robust. Like you mentioned, for example, the trusts are applied for through the IRS. They're the ones that issue the EIN numbers for those 98 grantor trusts. The person that files the documentation, the 1099 OIDs, registered with the IRS. They have a license to do that. They are a licensed practitioner as an ERO. Everything's in place, but the final piece of this puzzle is, how do I realize those funds so that I can clear my debts, pay my mortgage, do whatever I need to do, and then be able to recycle that same, because every time you spend, now I'm hoping you're understanding this, guys, every time you quote unquote spend money, you are creating more negotiable instruments. You're pushing that back out into the same system. The whole process starts again, which means that when you recoup those taxes and you then use them in the year that you're in, the following year, everything you used in that year, you can recoup that again in an infinite loop. Just stop and think about that for a second. What would that do for you and your situation right now? What would that do to this slavery model that we are all weighed down by? What would that allow you to do? So let's talk about the realization of the funds, Iain, because this is really important for people to understand. When the IRS agrees to send, we'll just call it money for now, send the money back, your report says it comes as a direct deposit marked as IRS Trias 310. Now, there are some restrictions in terms of certain bank accounts where they only allow 3 refunds within that bank account per year. So how does your protocol, what you've put together in this strategy, how does it use virtual account management to get around this sort of 3 refund limit and do that safely?
So you've got a portfolio of grants or trusts, and you've got one common Wyoming trust company, if you like. They're an unregulated trust company. They're deliberately unregulated so that they can operate as a under a power of attorney mandate, an attorney in fact mandate, and that enables the trust company, the unregulated trust company, to open a bank account, which is a master account with a whole series of sub accounts. So the sub account is linked to or connected to each of the grantor trusts. So when the IRS send their Trias 310, they are effectively sending it to a sub account of this overall master and sub account structure. The sub account is a virtual account with a reference number that can identify itself, give it to the IRS so they know where to send the Trias 310. It's either an ACH or a FedWire transfer straight to the bank account of the grantor trust, and the unregulated trust company, which is MLITR Research, can then move those funds to our members' foreign grantor trust, which is, we call it the Asset Fortress Protocol, which is the private treasury, which is a separate grantor trust with its own bank account, separate from the MLITR Research master and sub account structure. So that's where the membership will use their funds from the 98 series grantor trust, called the Asset Fortress Protocol, in a bank with a bank account that is in the or under the name of the Asset Fortress Protocol, just like any other bank account that you use every day of the week. Under the name of the birth certificate contracts, it's the same principle as that. It's basically a treasury account, and it's a foreign grantor's trust with a bank account that you can use that bank account to spend. That creates new negotiable instruments, puts more debt back into the system, generates more taxes on the 945 tax ledger. It can be recouped back to the original grantor trust, which is the one that receives the Trias 310. That trust, then the funds are moved from there to the back to the private treasury Asset Fortress grantor trust. It goes round and round in a circle. It's like infinity, just it goes round and round.
Okay, so I hope you're getting this, guys. There's two trusts here. Yeah, there's one that receives the FedWire or ACH, that does the filing and receives it, and then it gets moved from there to another trust structure, another 98 grantor trust that has a bank account attached to that where you can spend, and then you just repeat the whole cycle over and over and over again. So here's one question, Iain, that I think people are going to probably be thinking about. Banks are really fussy these days, aren't they? And what I mean by that is you can't even spend your own money half the time without them wanting to know, where did you get it from? What are you spending it on? Can I see proof of what you want to buy with the money? Absolutely ridiculous. I've spoken to people about this where they and seen instances where people have wanted to buy something that is maybe within the few £1,000 marker. Maybe it was a motorbike for their 18-year-old son as a birthday present, or maybe it was a first car, or maybe it was a new car, or whatever. The bank now wants to see proof of the item that you want to buy before they'll even let you take out your own money. It's ridiculous. So with that in mind, and thinking about how this works as well, we're not talking about a few £1,000s here. We're talking about potentially life-changing sums of money coming back to people. Huge amounts here. If you start moving huge amounts of money from these international trusts, is that going to be a problem in terms of the 98 series trust that we're going to spend it from? But also, what about the trust that it's coming into, and that trust is then moving it to the members' sort of trust with bank account? You talk about this money transfer business trap that's there. How do we get around that? How do we create sort of a safe harbor before it even gets to the members' bank account?
Well, the Wyoming regulations allow for a attorney in fact to open a master and sub account and get around that money services business trap, because they are operating as an attorney in fact for the grantor. The grantor is ultimately in control. So it's basically down to attorney in fact mandates, or it's the agency again. It's all about agency. The banks that are doing this are not spooked by large amounts. So you're not talking about retail bank accounts where you start transacting at a higher level, and they're gonna start asking lots of questions. These the receiving bank is one of the biggest banks in the United States. That's the bank account that's receiving the IRS Trias 310. And then the Asset Fortress Protocol is a private bank. Private banks every day of the week, they move larger amounts. That's what they do. They have high net worth customers who won't be staying with them very long if they start to scrutinise what their customers are doing with their own funds. They just go to another private bank. So
yeah, okay. Now a question has come through again. As this money tax is claimed, is the process transparent, which is the first part of the question? And then do we see which banks or negotiable instruments have been claimed or recouped?
well, you tell us which banks you created the signature credit with. So we can't recoup signature credit unless we know which bank you applied your signature to. So it was a bank, a series of bank payments from the past, mortgages, loans, credit cards. You tell us which banks you did that with and when and how much. Everything else is then created. You have a platform admin account. You can see what's going on, and of course, when it comes back out the other end, the tax redirection, you'll physically see the United States dollars in your Asset Fortress bank account, which you have control over. So yeah, it's all very transparent, but we can't do it without you telling us where you applied your signature up front.
Yeah. So just to your point in the socials there, if I was doing this, then I would have to tell the team here, these are the banks that I've used. These are the payments that I've made that have gone out of that bank or out of those series of banks. This is money that has gone out. These are the mortgages that I've had over the years, and it could be a current mortgage that I'm still paying. It could be an old mortgage that I had on a property or a remortgage. Doesn't matter. They're all securities created. So here's my history of mortgages that I've had. Here's the loans and credit cards that I've had and who they were with. And then, roughly the dates that they were taken out. That's pretty much all the team needs. And then everything else is done via, like we've said, via the proper structure, via a licensed, registered ERO to do the filings, through the right government and IRS approved tax software. One thing we haven't spoken about, Ian, is the wages and tax transcript as evidence that when it's gone through, when the filings have gone through, maybe you could just speak about, what happens when after you've filed a 1099 OID in the right way, and it goes through the IRS system. What happens then?
Well, the grantor trust, the reporting officer, that's the tax preparer, the ERO, files the 1099 OID electronically on tax approved software by the IRS, or approved by the IRS tax software. It's accepted on the software, and that generates within, hopefully, if the IRS is working efficiently, within 3 months they send out a wages and tax transcript, which is confirmation that the 1099 OID has generated a tax credit that can be drawn down by filing what's called a 1041 tax return. So that, again, the grantor trust can file that, but it's not going to file the 1041 and unless there's enough taxes funded on the 945 tax module to equal to all of the claims against that tax module. So that's where the trust company, the unregulated trust company, then as an officer of each grant or trust, commands the IRS to shift the taxes onto the 945 tax module, then files the 1041. Then the IRS sends the recoupment or the tax redirection to the bank accounts of each of the grants or trusts that have been established, for bank by bank. And it's investment banks that we are targeting, because that's where the 945 tax modules are being funded.
And remember, guys, this is tax that's already been paid. You're not bleeding them dry of their own funds. You're basically taking the taxes and redirecting them to where they belong. That's all you're doing. Taxes have already been paid. They'll do it every year. They'll continue to do that cycle every single year. You're simply saying, actually, it doesn't belong there, it belongs over here. And the structure to be able to do that is all in place. So I hope that answered your question. It's a fascinating subject, Iain, and I hope that we've broken it down for you in more understandable terms today. That was my goal. I think we've achieved it. I hope we've achieved it. I hope you've enjoyed what we've spoken about. If you're wondering, well, where do I go from here, or what do I do from here, then let me give you some resources, and then I want to talk a little bit about we're running a webinar at the weekend as well. So it's Thursday, 4th of June right now. Iain and I are going to be, I'll be hosting, Iain's going to be presenting, because Iain's got all the knowledge, and we're going to be doing that on Saturday. So Saturday, 10 a.m. UK time, we are going to be running our weekly webinar. If you want to register for that webinar, you can go here, roswebinars.is. You can register there. Seats are limited, as you can imagine. I said earlier, who wouldn't want taxes owed back to them? Why would you not want that? Everybody hates paying tax. So if you've got the opportunity to recoup some of that and life-changing amounts of that, why would you not want to do that? So as you can imagine, this is information the banks don't want you to know, particularly the investment banks, not necessarily the high street banks, but certainly the investment banks do not want you to know this. So what Iain's going to be talking about on Saturday is very sensitive information in reality, but there's nothing underhanded about it. It's all above board. The structure is all in place. If you want to learn more, come to our Saturday webinar. We only have 1,000 attendees in terms of space that we can apply to that webinar platform, and we always get over registered. So I would recommend, if you want to join us on Saturday morning, register as soon as we've finished today. Secure your spot. We'll send you an email with a link in there, and you can join us 10 a.m. sharp Saturday morning. We'd love to see you. If you are interested in the documentation surrounding today's discussion, then you need to go here, ecclesialaw.is, and you need to go to the reports section of Ecclesia Law. You'll find, oh goodness me, there must be 60, 70 plus reports on there now, if not more, that Iain has written. You'll see this one, which is one of the most latest ones to do with the Bills of Exchange Act. But if you want a real breakdown of the actual mechanics of recouping or redirecting those taxes back to you as the creditor, then you want to look at a report that is to do with the Clifford Protocol and how it's even been nominated by or recommended for a Nobel Prize because of its structure and how robust it actually is. That is I believe, a 13 to 14 page document. It's quite a read, but it really covers everything front to back. The mechanics of how the process starts, but also the private vault at the end, that asset fortress, and how the banking needs to be set up in the right way to be able to do that. So definitely check out Iain's reports on ecclesialaw.is. If you want to see more of the content that Iain and I have been discussing, then come to the platform, come to the ROS Media platform, and check out some of the other content there. We've done breakdowns on a lot of Iain's documents, including the Clifford Protocol. And if you're more of a visual kind of person and not much of a reader, then you'll be able to find some breakdowns, again, of those documents and those reports on the ROS Media platform. So that's all I've got to say, Ian, in terms of what we've covered today. I've really enjoyed this one. Any final thoughts from yourself before we let everybody go?
Yeah, I wrote a treatise a few weeks ago. It's got, if you really want to understand the subject, then it's all in there. It's the most comprehensive document, probably arguably available anywhere about this subject, because nobody else really, I don't think, and I've done a lot of research on who else out there is doing things like this, and you struggle to find anybody. So that document called the Treatise, which is on the Ecclesia Law Institute, if you really want to understand it from A through Z, then it's all in there. There's lots of other documents, but the Treatise joins everything together. It's the next one up from the Clifford Protocol, gives you a very good high level overview. The Treatise goes into it in a lot more detail, I'm always open to a debate. So if people out there think that my research is lacking somewhere, or is it's not accurate, or I've got something wrong, then my door is always open for a debate. Nobody ever accepts my offers of debate. Maybe tells you that I know what I'm talking about. But it's all in my papers, and the fact is that it's not this isn't a theory. We've had proven results, and we're not bending the rules. We're not slipping around the back door and sneaking in, and when no one's looking. We're doing it exactly the way the system has been designed, which is why it can be scaled, because we're not trying to circumvent any of the law. We're just basically following the process exactly how it was originally designed.
Exactly. We're not shimmying open the bars on a window at the top of the IRS to get ourselves in. We're going through the front door that they built. It's just that nobody knows where it is, and we do. So, and to Ian's point about this stuff works. If you were to go to our platform, so let me just put that back up very quickly. If you went to the rossmediaplatform.is, there is a 20-minute video on there with another colleague of mine here at the Republic of Old Souls called Ange, where we go through $600 million worth of tax recoupment evidence. Not the full 600 million, but we've had over 600 million confirmed back from the IRS. We go through that documentation. On screen, we show you multiple examples of IRS tax transcripts, just so that you, in case you know what they or don't know what they are, that's what one looks like. You probably can't see that very well, but that is mine. I have a couple here. There's mine and my wife's as well. So this works, guys. Okay, that is empirical proof that what Iain has put together works, that it's above board. There's nothing shady about what we're doing here, and it is very, very scalable. So that's what I would end with. I want to just answer two more questions in socials, if you could, Iain, before we let everybody go, because I don't want people who have been with us on the socials to think that we're ignoring them. So we've had a couple more questions. I'll answer the first one. You can answer the second one, because the first one's really easy to answer. I refinanced my mortgage 4 times over the years. Can I recoup all of them? Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can recoup the taxes paid on those 4 mortgages. Not a problem at all. The next question, Iain, is what if you're not living in the USA, in a country that does not recognize the relevant claim forms?
Well, the grantor trust is filing a 1099 OID, and it's foreign. It's international. It stands on its own. So it doesn't matter where you are. It matters where the grantor trust is, and it has to be foreign alien of the United States. It has to be basically it's its own nation. So it doesn't matter where in the world the signature credit was created. It matters where the filings were done, and whether the original signature credit can be tracked. And you'll find yet to find one we can't locate, that it's being the signature credit energy is being used in New York somewhere by an investment bank, and that's what's going on. The bankers in New York are basically trading human energy. They won't admit it. We've got the proof, which is the 945 tax modules.
Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's session as much as I have. Thank you for joining us on socials. If you're watching the recording of this, hope you found it beneficial. It's on the Ross Media platform. And we will see you, no doubt, on another episode very soon. We are going to be diving into other subject matters. We're going to be talking about hypothecation. So we are going to go into that on another interview with Iain. We'd love to have you back where we can go through that and maybe answer some of your questions live on the socials as well. But for now, have a great day. Remember, register for the Saturday webinar, 10 a.m. UK time. One more time, guys, you can do that here. You go to roswebinars.is to register for Saturday morning. We only have 1,000 seats. We would love to have you sat in one of them, learning more about how this works. So for now, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.